So thank you guys for joining us for our first Google Talks in the Birmingham office. I have the great pleasure today to introduce Bridget Russo, the CMO of Shinola. Before I do, for those of you who don't have a deep background on the company itself, I wanted to give you a little bit. It was conceived in 2011, so when we think about our own brand, Shinola is only about 5 years old. It is the maker of modern handcraft watches, bicycles, leather goods, journals, and pet accessories, of which it sounds like they're expanding into even more products, so we'll hear from Bridget about that. They're really focused on, and again, you think about those of you who work in the automotive industry, some of the importance of handcrafting, leather, some of the more upscaled ways that we try and convey important elements of our auto manufacturer's background. A lot of that is in the messages that Shinola brings into the market, so really interesting there. As far as their locations, those of you probably know they're headquartered here in Detroit in the College for Creative Studies building, which was a former automotive research lab. And then since the company's foundings, they have, I think, about 7 stores now that they've opened up. As Bridget herself, a little bit of background on Bridget, her background started in PR, which is coming in handy. Obviously, as a CMO, you have to deal with a lot of things, particularly in social media nowadays. With her background in PR, she started on the agency side, very familiar to some of you, and then moved over onto the client side, working with Diesel in the fashion industry. From there, she moved and started to work with Eden, which is a company that Bono started with his wife to support to drive industry in Africa. And that moved her into her own consultancy, which is a lot of our Googlers do, is to start their own businesses. And from there, it led her to Shinola and from New York to Detroit. And so with that, we welcome her and want to hear her story and learn a bit more about Shinola. So with that, I'll welcome Bridget.
Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day to hear the Shinola story. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So I'm going to take you through quickly, since we do have the fireside chat, and I do want to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions afterwards, so I'll kind of whiz through this a little bit, give you a little background as to why we started the company and what's up next in terms of new categories. So we started with building a watch factory in Detroit. Back in 2011, people thought our founder, Tom Kartsurtis, was crazy. Why not accept that manufacturing is gone from this country? Why not let the rust and weeds finish what they started? Why not just embrace the era of disposability? And why didn't we buy a warmer coat before we moved here? Through 3 Detroit winters, we've asked ourselves these questions and worked not to find our answers, but to build it. So really, from the beginning, the intention was always to not only be in a city where manufacturing was in its history and in its lifeblood, but also to be in a city where we could have a positive impact on the community, in our case, in creating jobs. Here's a little video. So this is where it all began.
The question isn't why you built a watch factory in Detroit, it's why you built one anywhere else. This is the city that made this country, with its steel, with its skill, with its labor. Reestablishing trades that haven't been seen in this country in a generation or more. It's a tall order to return to form, but it's what hundreds of Shinola employees work towards every day here in Detroit, where we believe in the beauty of industry, the glory of manufacturing. Shinola, where American is made.
So it started with watches. We launched our first product in 2013. The factory opened in 2012, which is when I started with the company. Alongside watches, we also had bicycles, leather goods, and journals. But really our messaging from the beginning was watches built in Detroit of quality. And so we started there. Our first watch was the Runwell. If you guys were around at that time paying attention to some of the marketing, we had launched the Runwell watch before we actually had product in market. So that was March 2013. The previous year we had a brand website up where we were speaking directly to the consumer through social, primarily at the time Twitter and Facebook. and really telling people about our story directly, not going through the trades and sort of the normal way you would launch a brand, showing product before it was finished, showing swatches of leather, talking about our relationship with the College for Creative Studies where we're based, to the degree that some people were confused as to what we were. They would be like, are you a watch company? Are you a bike company? Are you a school? But that really helped lead us to the launch of the Runwell. Fast forward to March of 2013, we had about 10,000 people on our email list at that point, and about the same number of followers on Facebook and Twitter, and we launched the watch. We hadn't actually made the watch yet. $550 price point. We had 2,500 units. By the end of that week, so 8 days, we sold out of the watch, which was pretty incredible. We really didn't know in the beginning. There was some thought that Shinola would actually be more of a company to make watches for other brands. But then when we saw the strength of the Runwell and the Shinola brand, we decided to go full force. Subsequently, we've launched these other, what we call platforms, and most recently the Canfield, which is a refined Runwell. Bicycles. So bicycles, going back to the 80s, really, that production went offshore. The U.S. primarily, one of the biggest names, Schwinn, you might know. The brand's still out there, but it's not owned by the family anymore. They were one of the last to move their manufacturing overseas, so they lost the right, they sold the rights to their name. But they did hold on to one piece of their business called Waterford Precision Cycles. So they were making custom bicycles, $10,000 and up, that people would wait months for. So we met Sky Yeager. How we approach all of our categories is really finding leaders within that category. So in the case of bikes, that was Sky. Sky said, I know the guy we need to go to. Richard Schwinn up there in the corner is a great grandson of the man who started Schwinn Bicycles. And we approached him and said, what would it take for you to make bicycles for Shinola? And we said, we'll probably make about 1,000 a year. He said, I need to hire more people. So we're like, great, right in line with our messaging. So, some people ask, well, why are the bikes so pricey? The Runwell is $3,000. The Bixby that you see there is $2,000. And it's because of the quality and the craftsmanship that goes into it. So we make the frame and fork with Waterford, and then we assembled the bikes, as you see there, in our Detroit store. Paper, we work with a bindery in Ann Arbor, or close to Ann Arbor, called Malloy Brothers. Sorry, I had a brain fart there for a minute. And again, we really saw the market. So with all of our categories, we really look at them in two ways, as brand builders or as volume drivers. So bicycles, leather, and soon to be audio, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, are really the volume drivers. And then things like the journals, bicycles, pet accessories are the brand builders. They're equally as important, but it really helps us not only kind of continue to provide products that are relevant to the lifestyle of our consumer, but also to add a point of difference in the marketplace. So if you go into a Neiman's or a Nordstrom in the watch department, you might see a Shinola bike hanging. We actually made all of the buyers of the big department stores come to Detroit before they wanted to buy the line. So that definitely was helpful in helping them show the full breadth of the brand in their stores. Leather, we recently signed on a few years ago now, John and Richard. They had a brand called Lambertson and Truex that did very well. They're highly regarded in the fashion industry. Then they moved on to Tiffany's, where they built their leather business to a $50 million business. And we're kind of in semi-retirement when we approached them to run our leather business. So we started with small leather goods and have expanded now into bags, wallets, belts. Come this fall, we'll really have a full representation for women. So again, looking at leaders within the categories to lead the design and production. And then pet accessories. So these are these fun categories, just as much work, but ones that really help create the buzz around the brand, because it's not every day that you launch a new watch or a new bicycle or a new range of journals. But this is an opportunity to get that PR earned media value. And then the marketing. So it all started, this was the ad that we ran going back March 2013. At first we weren't going to advertise. We were like, no, we're not that kind of brand, we're not going to do it. right about when I came on board, we hired an agency called Partners in Spade based out of New York. They really helped us design the next version of the site, which is pretty much what you see today, and really put a stake in the ground around Detroit-built watches of quality. And we decided to take this ad out. We ran it in the New York Times, USA Today, Detroit Free Press, and the Wall Street Journal, sort of midweek in the process of selling the watch. And by the time the New York Times, Sunday Times Style ran on Sunday, they were sold out already. You might remember this when Detroit announced bankruptcy. A few days later, we ran this in the New York Times. To those who have written off Detroit, we give you the birdie. The birdie happened to be a watch that we were releasing at that same time. And again, the PR value on this was amazing. And again, you know, for me, if you guys are familiar with PR Newswire, that's where you would, you know, put your press releases. I really saw the New York Times as our PR Newswire. I found that when you had something relevant that had culturally relevant impact, the New York Times was a great vehicle. When it came to Mother's Day and Father's Day, and we were just announcing the Runwell in a different color, that was probably not the best ROI to run a full-page ad in the New York Times. And then the second year, we worked with Bruce Weber. So Bruce Weber, you guys might know, famed fashion photographer. I like to say the first year we showed people what was behind our doors, highlighting the people that work in the factory and establishing ourselves as a leader within the industry. And then the next year, with our work with Bruce, it was a love letter to Detroit, celebrating the people outside of our doors and why we came to Detroit in the first place. Last year, you might remember the launch in April of the Apple Watch. We called the agency, I think a week before, and said, hey, can you guys come up with something that would kind of just, you know, get us in the conversation of this major launch? And so they came up with this, a watch so smart that it can tell you the time just by looking at it. Runwell, just smart enough. So we ran these ads again, you know, sprinkle here and there. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, ran some digital around it too. And again, the buzz that we created off of it was really tremendous. In a time when, and we all know how much Apple spends on advertising. So I had a few friends that worked there, and I got a text from one saying, cheeky, which it was. And then this year, in an election year, we knew jobs was going to be a hot topic. And we really wanted to celebrate the fact that we created over 500 jobs since we launched. And so we came out with this campaign. There's a funny thing that happens when you build factories in this country. It's called jobs. And again, really highlighting the people behind the products. We're a true manufacturing company built not by the things we make, but by the people who make them. This year, in the past, we were our media plan was primarily print, and we started to see some diminishing returns, I would say, mid last year. So we really did a shift towards digital this year, working with premium partners like Vanity Fair, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, Vice, to create content. So some of that you guys might have seen. We'll continue with that for second half of the year around big product launches. So continuing to talk about our leather, our watches, and expand our reach outside of our immediate consumers. Our big push for second half of the year will be around women's. The challenge that we do have is that talking about jobs is great, but when you're trying to sell a hobo bag, talking about jobs doesn't really help. It doesn't mean that, you know, women don't care about creating jobs, but when you're trying to sell someone this great leather bag, that messaging doesn't always link up together. So that's something that we're working through now to understand. Probably around September, around the debates, the jobs messaging will come up again, but then we'll make a shift towards really focusing on celebrating our women's product and showing people that we're serious about our women's products. Retail. So our retail environments are really, in my view, part of our marketing. We look at them as living, breathing things. They're not museums for products, but really community spaces. So we activate our stores quite frequently, 2 to 3 times a month. We not only throw our own events, but we open them up to the community. So the local PR association might hold their annual meeting in the morning. We work with Creative Mornings to hold talks in our stores. We're currently working with a local barbershop in Detroit called the Social Club. They do a series called Shop Talk, or they actually cut people's hair while they're participating in a talk. It sounds weird, but it works. If anybody has attended, they're pretty interesting. So we're doing that not only in Detroit and Ann Arbor, but across cities, DC, New York, LA. And each store is really unique, taking on the personality, not only of the building that we're in, but also the city that we're in. And there's a few. We're now at, is it 15, 16 stores? By the end of this year, we'll have 20 and aim to open 8 to 10 every year. What's next? The fun part, audio. So come October, November, we'll start with turntables, working with this gentleman here, Alex Rawson, who again is a leader within the category. He started a headphone brand that he's got on right there called AutoZ. Looks like he has waffles on his ears, but highly regarded within the audiophile community. So again, we saw an opportunity. If you look at what Beats did, Beats charges a lot of money for a product that doesn't really warrant that price point, and everyone you walk around and you see, I'm sure a lot of people in the office might have Beats headphones, but our audiophile friends tell us that it is not of the quality that it should be for the price point. So we saw an opportunity to bring value into the category with good design and audiophile quality. And then jewelry. So some of you may recognize Pamela Love. She's a designer out of New York. We're partnering with her to launch jewelry come mid-October. This will be part of a larger Shinola women's launch, so not only jewelry, but expanding our watch offering and a new collection called Gomelski. We do have a style right now called Gomelski, but this is sort of an offshoot of that. And this is one of my favorite films that we did with Bruce Weber.
You know what? I think that when it comes to Detroit, I view it just how I view love. Like, I feel like in everything you have like a soulmate, right? If I had to just give like one line about the city of Detroit, I would most definitely say that I belong here, and it is definitely a soulmate of mine. I was working on this poem a few days ago, and it's about the city of Detroit, but it's how it breeds like greatness, great kids,
Yes.
great boys, great girls, how we grow up to be great men and women. And I wanted to read it to you.
Okay.
That's fine. Somewhere in the projects, there's a kid working on a project to project to the world. He lives in a city that grows boys and girls into lions and tigers, a city that takes the fire and the ashes, builds, rebuilds, turns abandoned houses and empty fields into things worth looking at, a
Yes.
place that never
Yes.
looks back, the center stage of a nation, the heartbeat, the patience, the
Yes.
music, the Motown, the Midtown, the
Right.
downtown, the always come back around, where we fight for our reputation, walk, ride, bike to our destination, practice patient knows
Yes.
that they can't forget about
Yes,
us.
that's
Detroit,
right.
the city that continues to call the world's bluff. Somewhere there's a kid working on a project to
Yes.
project from a city that's rebuilding, that we building
Wow.
from the ashes together, so that everywhere there can be Detroit.
Beautiful. God
Like,
bless you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
I'm glad you like it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, I think it might sit in there. Okay. Yeah. That was really powerful. You can
still
see why
love
you like
It's
it.
like now 2 years old, and I think still totally relevant.
Yeah. So you mentioned, I've heard you say in some of your discussions, this idea of conscious consumerism and how a brand is basically responsible for being a really good brand. And so when you look at some of this and you can see how you're investing in having the best people build the brands that you want to, the products you want to present, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
so it's a concept that I was first introduced to when working for Bono and Ali back in 2004 when they launched the brand Eden, and they were really pioneers in the space, especially in fashion. The idea of, conscious fashion, people didn't understand, the green movement was happening. There were some organic brands out there. None of them were all that fashionable. So this idea that you could have quality product out there, but by the nature of your business practices or your production practices, you were also helping to build communities and have a positive impact. Coming from the fashion industry where you never talked about your production, in part because you didn't want to let your competitors know where you were manufacturing, but also you know, now we know so many things have happened since then. You guys probably weren't even born yet. Kathy Lee Gifford, Nike, and everything subsequently that happened from there. It wasn't pretty. You know, the fashion industry can be a pretty ugly industry, or has been in the past, not intentionally. I think as things went offshore, that control and understanding how things were being manufactured in other places, they weren't up to the same standards as the US. So, you know, a lot of people early on got burned. I don't think Nike set out intentionally, you know, to have children making their clothes, but unfortunately, it's hard to have that control when you're doing things overseas. A lot has changed, but this idea of buying products and supporting products that have a positive impact, whether that's on the environment, whether that's on the community, I think now for millennials and anyone that's under 30, I think that's a big part of that purchase decision. You know, it certainly is for me. I'm not under 30. But, you know, I think if all other things are equal, I'm willing to pay a little bit more to know that this product is having some sort of positive impact.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it still has to be a strong product. And we learned at Eden the hard way, you know, we really put the mission in front of the brand and thought of product second. And at Shinola, what I really loved when I met them, I was like, wow, this product is amazing. The fact that, you know, we were creating jobs, to me, was the cherry on top, but that product needs to stand on its own.
Yeah, do you see that as being increasingly challenging as the demand for the product increases and the scale and the volume that you need to fulfill that demand increases, as we think of other brands who have maybe mentioned even Nike in this case? Do you see that as a challenge for
It's a huge
Shinola as you go
challenge.
forward?
You know, as you grow, and we really look at everything we do from, you know, in the beginning, we looked at where to source our shopping bags, and we said, well, we can source them in the States, but and spend $12 on them, or we could take the savings of sourcing the bag overseas and put it towards R&D to doing what we're doing in Detroit and helping to grow that. And since then, we started with the watch factory. I didn't mention, but we opened a leather factory 2 years ago, where we're producing the majority of our leather watch straps and some of our small leather goods. So again, continuing to add to that capacity. The reality is, we're in a global economy. So every single component is not made under one roof. That hasn't existed for a very long time. You know, we felt very strongly what we were doing more than assembly, and so we used the word build. You guys probably read that's got us into a little hot water of recent, but I think it's an opportunity for us to work with the FTC on clarifying for the consumer and makers of products to say, this isn't clear. It's not clear for the consumer, and it's not clear for anyone who's, you know, trying to do business and do the right thing in the U.S. You know, I can tell you from experience, there's stuff out there that says made in Italy or made in France that is definitely not made there. They might add a zipper at the end or a small stitch, and their country allows them to say that to preserve, you know, their industry, what's left of it. So this is happening across the board. You know, the one thing I can say, you know, to anyone, please, we do tours. You're welcome to sign yourself up for one. You walk through that factory and you see the people there, most of them Detroiters. It's hard to say that we're not having a positive social impact. And the most disheartening thing, you know, about it is when you try and suggest to these people that what they're doing isn't important, or what they're doing. I heard some comments, as people do on social media, oh, a monkey can do it. It's like putting together IKEA furniture. First of all, I'm challenged putting together IKEA furniture.
I'm challenged putting anything together, it seems.
But it is hard. You know, a watch is made up of these tiny little parts. And to suggest that assembly is not as complicated, or, you know, not an important job that takes some level of skill, you know, that's why we felt very strongly around the word build. Now we have to qualify that to make sure it's clear that it's a combination of U.S. and imported parts. Something that we were always transparent about when you look into our FAQs. In fact, there's a question, is this American made? And we answer that and have done from the very beginning. But I think that as a brand, and also the FTC, need to take this opportunity to educate the consumer. Maybe there's like with food. You know, if you guys remember with food, it was sort of the Wild West, and people, natural and organic, and what did it all mean? well, now there are systems in place and labeling in place. Maybe we need to do the same thing with consumer goods.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that you have made an impact in Detroit beyond today's news of the FTC. So, you know, how does that, it sounds like you've been trying to do that regardless of what retail store what location you open a retail store. How do you guys factor that into where you do open them up, and how do you look to embed yourselves in the community? Like, I know even this Saturday you have a local band playing at the store in Detroit. So tell us a little bit about how you've continued to look at where you open stores and how important you've made an impact, you're trying to make an impact in the local market.
I think for us, you know, it's always a balance.
Yeah.
We recently got some investments, so we have a board of directors, and so, you know, there's a responsibility we have now to a group of people versus one person. But you were just actually having this conversation today. We're still a baby brand, so there has to be that balance of brand building and making sure that we're still unique and special for people and high touch, and also getting the ROI and getting us to profitability to make sure that we're being responsible and also growing a sustainable brand. As far as the community aspect is concerned, we'll continue to look at our manufacturing, not just in Detroit, we're actually looking at Chicago, potentially for eyewear. So parts of the manufacturing that we can do in the States, we will, whether that's through our own facilities or partnering with facilities that are out there. You know, one of our leather partners potentially could close because their rent's going up and they can't afford it. So it's looking at that and saying, maybe we can put them together with manufacturers that we know in Florida to combine efforts. One is strong in high-end handbags, the other one has great process and back of house. You know, how do you bring, there's so much time and effort that we put into these things to continue to stand behind our goal, which is to create American jobs.
Yeah.
You know, on a local level, we go into markets and really, either it's working with an agency or just going in on our own and making those relationships with the local community. So the local makers, different organizations that are working on job creation, and really embedding ourselves. In some cases, it might be as simple as, you know, hosting an event for them in our store, a fundraiser, or donating a watch for an auction. But again, making those relationships on a local level as well.
Yeah.
And hopefully you know, as we start to grow and really start to push through tentpole initiatives, I think the idea of workforce development is something that we can be thought leaders in. So we're talking now on how do we, whether it's partnering with Job Corps, which was started in DC but has local chapters across the US, and really help playing an active role in this workforce development. Because the reality is, and I was just starting to educate myself on it, there's, I think it's something like 2 million what they call middle skilled jobs out there. So primarily trade, manufacturing jobs that there are no longer that generation with that skill set. So it's like a dying breed of artisans. And two things need to happen. One, there needs to be infrastructure for the training, but also a PR campaign to encourage people to take these jobs, because it's a better job than working at McDonald's or you know, any of the big box stores, and it's an opportunity to learn a craft and work your way up. You know, my mother owned a factory. She started working in a factory in New York, and it put food on our table and put me through school and through college. So it is a career opportunity, and we need to kind of change the face of what these jobs are. They're not dirty jobs. Yeah. They're actually career paths for everyone. It's not, you know, some people will go on and start their own tech business, or some people may decide they want to be designers, but there's a lot of these jobs out there and not the skilled labor force to take them, and then we have the unemployment rate. So, you know, these things can be mutually beneficial.
So do you see that, was that a premise at the start, do you think, for the company? At the heart of it was job creation? Or did it start as, you know, really, really strong, well-made products, and then the job creation thing? Because it is a really interesting component. You didn't actually mention, I think eyewear is one of the next areas that you're going to go into. So you think about eyewear and how you would now repeat this whole process of finding the right partners and go about selling it. So curious about that.
Job creation was always part of the conversation alongside making quality products that were well designed and that were classic. You know, from a business opportunity standpoint, watches, for instance. So you have watches at the, you know, what they call fashion watches. So Michael Kors and brands such as that at the $350, $500 range. And then you have the high-end luxury watches, Tag Heuer and the like. And no one was really at our price point offering the quality with a great brand story behind it. So we saw a business opportunity as well. Warby Parker is a good example. They saw a business opportunity, and they also have the social impact part of their business, which, if you notice, is not front and center. It's sort of behind the scenes even more so now than ever before when they first launched. So I think ultimately it has to start with good product.
Yeah.
It has to be somewhat of a differentiator in the marketplace, and there has to be a positive impact in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a double bottom line or a triple bottom line,
Yeah.
which is hard to achieve, but you know, I think it's important now. And in the long term, it's just good business.
Yeah. So always back to that conscious consumerism type thing.
Definitely.
So we're here at Google, and data is part of our world. We love data. And so some of the marketing examples as the CMO, you've talked about traditionally based, and then a lot of the experiential things you talked about in your retail stores, very experientially based. So can you talk to this group who really looks at a lot of data and the campaigns and things that they do, how you think about marketing and what kind of data you look at based on the things that are important to you and trying to reach these consumers?
Yeah, in the beginning we didn't have data to look at, right? we had nothing to benchmark it against. Now, you know, going into our 4th year, we do have that data, and we are diving into that data and actually working with you guys as well as a group out of DC called Resonate to really hone in on, okay, we have this fan base here of Shinola advocates and super fans. We know there are like people out there who don't even know we exist yet. So how do we develop those personas? And then we're first time ever, believe it or not, doing programmatic. So really looking at like individuals out there and using a lot of digital to reach them. Really cutting back on print. I'm still a big fan on experiential. I think at the end it's about the mix. It's not like, oh, all digital is the way to go or all print is the way to go. It's about the mix because that's how people live their lives. That's how they're consuming media and information. So it can't be all one way. I think part of the success early on is that, and again, this is somewhat anecdotal, but if people would tell me, oh, you guys are everywhere. Well, we weren't. I had no way had a budget to be everywhere, but we were everywhere where they were in the right moment. So, you know, and there was a lot of, you know, great PR value there. So they saw the PR, then they'd go online and, you know, see the social activity, then they'd go outside and see the out of home. It's how that mix all works together. And then you have to be careful, you know, the data, depending on how you look at it, can drive you in a direction that may not be the right direction. This is somewhat of a weird example, but I'll give it to you anyway. So when I was working for Bono, he often told this story. There's an NGO that went into a village in Kenya, and the women were walking like 5 miles to clean water every day. And so they came in and they built a well in the village. And the women kept walking the 5 miles. Well, no one stopped to ask them, you know, we're going to build a well, where would you like us to put it? So finally, after the fact, because they were so puzzled, they asked, why are you still walking 5 miles? And they said, well, it's to get away from the men. That's our time to get away. No one asked the question. So they were like, well, what if we did it halfway? They're like, perfect. And that was the well they went to. So we can't forget that this data is great, but we're all human beings, right? And there's aspects to our behavior that can't be put on a spreadsheet. So the emotion and the high touch of a brand, if you can maintain that in some way, shape, or form, you know, especially when you have limited dollars, there has to be that element of just human nature. And I don't know the answer for every brand of what that is. And you know, I still watch that video and think, well, maybe we should run that in theaters. You know, just because you don't even know what the hell we're selling, but I'm intrigued. I want to know more about that brand after seeing that video.
Yeah.
So it is about the balance. It's about the mix. And don't be so dictated by the data that you lose the fact that you are all human beings and consumers as well. And that gut feeling of, what is right and taking some calculated risk.
Yeah. I want to open it up for any questions that you all might have that you'd like to ask Bridget. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for coming in first off. I did not know anything about the association with the Schwinn family tied to your bicycles, but that seems to be a model in your brand extensions of identifying a personality or an expert in the field to kind of help to launch that. Can you explain like the process of identifying that person that represents best the Shinola brand? Because I would think it's more art than science.
Yes.
Going back to the data of like, is it a relationship? How do you identify that person that represents how you want to launch a brand?
We've been very lucky. Our founder knows a lot of people. And so it's a little bit of asking around, asking advice from, friends. And then some people who just somehow cross our paths because, someone might know what we're up to and say, I've got the person for you. You need to talk to Sky Yeager. Or you need to talk to Alex Rawson. So it's been pretty organic from that perspective. And we've never done big searches. I mean, even we just named Tom Lawand, our CEO. We didn't put the job out there. We never did. But we just started to put our feelers out. Tom was working with us on some side projects. And again, it was that gut feeling that our founder felt like this was the right guy to help lead the brand. And so that's kind of, at least to date, how decisions are made around people in particular. And it makes for a really, Tom, our founder, refers to us as the bar scene in Star Wars. And there is a bit of that. We all come from varied backgrounds, but I think it's helpful in keeping us on our toes and also seeing different perspectives. The fact that Tom comes from, the sports arena and coming from that background, I think is an interesting perspective for, we don't even like to call ourselves a fashion brand. We see ourselves more as a design brand. So I think having those outside voices and that outside perspective, because if you're all in a room with the same, if we had just had a whole bunch of fashion people, we'd be doing things very differently today.
Yeah. Other questions? Go ahead.
The skilled trade thing has always been kind of a passion of mine. I grew up downriver and all the high schools down there. My parents' generation had shop. They had a actual working auto shop within the high school and everything. But then that generation put such a stigma on going to trade school. How do you feel, especially with how deeply passionate people like your sectors, upper middle, who probably came from those families that had the stigma? How do you use that, and where do you start to try to remove it? I mean, does it start with politicians? Does it start in the schools? Does it start with the brand advocates that you have recalibrating their mindset? Where do you really start to get rid of that trade school is underachieving and you have to move before your school because those jobs are incredible and the skills do transcend and move very fluidly?
Yeah, I think definitely education is one piece, and working at the civil level to make sure that you have the support locally in these cities, because there are certain cities like Detroit that are more, sort of better poised to really drive this. Buffalo's another good city, and also working with partners in the media who have such control now to really shape people's opinions one way or the other, to help tell this story. And especially now with things like Etsy, for instance, I think it's coming back to where people are interested in learning how to make things on their own, making things and selling them now with a great platform that you can go direct to consumer. So it's good timing. And I think now with kids coming out of college with that degree, that really expensive degree, and no guarantee of a job, zero, so people are looking at different ways of how they can build a career. And it's not the traditional doctor, lawyer, not everyone can be an entrepreneur and make the next Uber or whatever. So it is, education's a big piece of it, but that you need that support at the civil level to, what's the word, making sure that there's certain land agreements, that it's not just about building luxury condos, right? Because it's very quick to say a factory will, not yield as much from a real estate perspective than a luxury condo, but that's not going to help build a community, and certainly not help build a diversity within the community. And I'm hoping Detroit has an opportunity, and there's a lot of people working hard at this to help build this infrastructure. And also, if we can make it work in Detroit, that's a blueprint, let's hope, to do it in other cities. But I was one of those kids who grew up in the factory, and I said from a very young age I would never work in the factory. My brothers, on the other hand, did work in the factory, made a lot more money than I did. Got burned when things, by the 90s, that was it. But it's all coming back now. My brother actually held on to his machines, and now his knitting business is he's getting the phone calls that a lot of people sold their machines. He happened to hold on. But I think there's a huge opportunity there, but it's going to be a lot of different entities working together, and there needs to be a huge PR campaign that the media can help drive to change the perception.
So a lot of people in this room work with CMOs every day. They have to go, and meet and provide thoughts, ideas. Sitting there, and obviously you've had a good PR background. It's helped set you up for a lot of things you're even handling today. Could you give them advice? And really, how do you think about when people come in? You said you talked to your agency about the ad that was going to run when the Apple Watch was being announced. Can you give us any advice for how you think about it, or when someone comes in to talk with you about ideas or thoughts, how you think about things?
For me, I'm always impressed when someone takes the time to research your brand. All the information's out there now. Not all of it accurate, but there's a lot of sources out there where you can really educate yourself about a brand. I mean, even for people who are interviewing, I'm often shocked by people who don't really do their research. I'm like, why are you here? Yeah. So do your research, help them realize that you took a moment to not only understand their brand, but to understand their business. So, not only researching Shinola, but looking at where we sit in Nordstrom and who's our competitive set, and looking at their business leading up to a meeting. You don't need to become a watch expert, but just gathering that information and bringing that to a meeting to say, we looked at your business, we looked at your competitive set, and here's some learnings that we had from an outside perspective. Because often, you guys might see something that we don't see because we're in the thick of it. So I think a fresh approach to just the information that's out there before you even get to the meeting.
Yeah. You had a question? Go ahead.
So we all know Detroit is world famous for manufacturing, which we've talked about a bit, but also famous for creativity. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to Detroit's influence on Shinola design now, and maybe as you see it in the future, especially with some of these world-class leaders in the new areas you're going into, being New York-based, as you might expect. But how is Detroit perhaps playing a role, talent in the world, what have you?
For us, we're very, from a product perspective, inspired by the architecture. So definitely the architecture of Detroit. I would say the spirit and the attitude of Detroit you see in our marketing, and sort of the irreverence of our voice comes from Detroit, that Detroit versus everybody sort of sentiment. I do think that in order for Detroit to really be a player as it was in the global marketplace from a creativity, innovation standpoint, it needs to be a place that maintains its talent. Because often what happens is the talent's here and they leave. They go to Chicago, they go to New York because the opportunity isn't here. So as businesses continue to grow or move to Detroit, I think that's an opportunity to get back in the ranks, if you will, of being an innovative city, of being a city that drives creative. It certainly inspires us every day, but I think being able to keep the talent that comes here is something that we need to work on. The education system is a whole other thing, because if you're a young person, or if you're coming married with kids, I don't have kids, so I live in Detroit. I'm not worried about the education system personally, but it's a huge problem because I have colleagues of mine that say, I would love to live in Detroit, but I don't know where to send my kids to school, so they drive them to, Grosse Pointe or whatever. After a while, first of all, not everyone has access to do that.
Yeah.
So those are things that are really important, just basic things. Our public school system really needs a lot of work in order to make this an attractive city for creative people, for business-minded people to live in and build a family and not have to go live in the suburbs because they need to be in a certain zip code
Right.
for their kids to go to a good
Yeah,
school.
very important, very important. One last question from the audience, and I'll close with one. Go ahead.
So this may be a little bit of a rumor, but I was curious to hear. When Shinola was started, to what extent was Detroit factored in as like the only location, or was it like one of several locations that were considered? I've heard kind of how price point was factored into choosing Detroit as a potential location to kind of headquarter Shinola. And then part two of that, as you expand internationally, what is the recognition of Detroit on the international level? And do you think like Shinola itself is now going to become a vehicle to help promote Detroit, whereas Detroit first may have promoted Shinola? It almost seems like it's now Shinola's turn to promote Detroit in the international spectrum.
Well, we definitely are doing that. I mean, this brand, part of our DNA and what we built this brand on is the fact that we're in Detroit, the fact that, we have a watch factory and a leather factory in Detroit. The intention was always that this would be a global brand. We didn't know how the Detroit name would resonate, certainly outside of Michigan, but even outside of the US. What we're finding is people, it's resonating because it's that underdog story. People want Detroit to win. There's a Detroit everywhere. So, sorry. It is resonating, and I'm choking.
No, don't choke. It's funny because I think as we travel, many of us travel all over the place, and we probably all feel that we're the ones standing up for Detroit. I know whether I'm here or internationally, I get teased a lot. Oh, Detroit, what's happening in Detroit? I'm like, come on, Detroit is great. So I feel like we all feel that a lot of times. So.
But to answer the price question, it wasn't really so much price, as we invested a lot of money to build the factory and do the training, which we continue to do. And we did not take the tax incentives that were offered to us. Certainly it's cheaper to open a factory in Detroit than it is in the middle of Manhattan or LA. But really, the opportunity that we saw, you had a workforce, a trained and talented workforce that were sitting without jobs. So we thought we could transfer that skill into watchmaking and leather making. So sure, is it cheaper to open a factory in Detroit? Yes. I mean, that's changing now with real estate booming the way that it's doing. But it wasn't necessarily about the price. It was about the opportunity and the talent base that exists here in manufacturing. You're welcome.
And so one last question. You mentioned Shinola to be a global brand. It's only about 5 years old. So what are the global brands, the iconic brands that might be on the wall or in the thoughts of those at Shinola to emulate?
Well, even so, we poked fun at them. Apple definitely is up there. And it was all in good fun. Tesla, Virgin, these are all brands that we aspire to. I think Tesla would probably be number one on that list.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing to just be a part of what's happening in Detroit. We're one of, you guys know how many people they're working both small and on a large scale like Dan Gilbert to really help bring the city back on its feet. And my hope is that it continues to be a place of equal opportunity, that it doesn't just become my lovely New York, that $1 million plus, condos that most people can't afford. Because it really hurts a city when it becomes homogeneous like that.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure there's a balance of opportunity that maintains the diversity. That's the one thing that I think New York lost over the years, because now you turn around everywhere you go. I mean, Bed-Stuy, which, I remember growing up as a kid in Brooklyn, you just didn't go there. And now it's like luxury apartment buildings and, townhouses all over the place.
Yeah.
So, and that's going to keep the creativity here as well.
Well, we want to thank you for your time. We know how busy you are.
Thank you.
We have a little gift for you, and thank you for being part of our first talks at Google in the Birmingham office. So.
Thank Thank you for having
Yeah.
us.